We light the chalice, symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith, with words from Lisa Doge. Why a flaming chalice, the question comes. It's the cup of life, we answer. A cup of blessings overflowing, a cup of water to quench our spirit's thirst, a cup of wine for celebration and dedication. The flame of truth, the fire of purification, oil for anointing, healing, out of chaos, fear, and horror. Thus was the symbol crafted a generation ago. So may it be for us. In these days of uncertainty, sorrow, and rage, and a light to warm our souls and guide us home. And now let's say together the words of our mission, which affirm our shared purpose. Empowered by love, we transform ourselves and serve our world.
Good morning. I am Sam Rutledge. I use they or he pronouns, and I am a member of this church, not a professional preacher, but an enthusiastic amateur. And I get the privilege of calling us to worship and helping to hold this space together. We are here for worship. We are the same, but we are not the same. We come in joy, in grief, in celebration, in addiction, in recovery, in struggle, in oppression, in great fortune, in hard times. We are individuals. We are parts of a whole. We bring curiosity, weariness, a thirst for compassion, and compassion to give. We are bound to one another in covenant, here to help each other and to receive help in our shared and individual searches for truth and meaning. Let this worship we share be a comfort. Let our curiosity and our wonder commingle, and let us be here to light one another's way and bear the burdens of struggle together. And now I get to tell the story. This is a story about a curious and enterprising young woman who, when faced with a decision where the right thing to do was not obvious, made the best decision she could and lived with the consequences, which is the best and bravest thing that any of us can do. This young woman lived with an elderly uncle. It's not exactly clear how the two ended up together, which was a matter of much whispered speculation and gossip in their town. Her uncle was a kind old man who had something of a checkered past, another subject spoken of in whispers. This young woman had picked up enough, listening in unguarded moments, to put together a loose idea that her uncle had gotten into some kind of trouble with a local deity who had, in response, made a gift of a beautiful and ornate box which was rumored to have been cursed and which had never been opened. You may be guessing, especially if you're familiar with the classics, that this young woman is quite famous to this day. Her name was Pandora. Now, in the classic telling of this story, Pandora opened the box out of a shortage of self-control. The story is usually told to make a sort of heavy-handed point about what a bad thing impulsiveness is. I'm not so sure. Let's think about things from Pandora's perspective, right? First off, this god, Zeus, what is he doing? Putting a gift that you're never supposed to open in front of a human being. History is full of gods pulling off this same move. Eve and the apple, and it's always a male god putting the gift in front of a woman as if to make some point. You put a mysterious treasure in front of a human being right in their path, and you know that they have to open it. Besides that, this box is a gift from a god. No one knows what's supposed to be in it, what untapped potential is there, what great things there might be to benefit all of humanity. Besides all of which, you have to remember that in Pandora's time, none of the troubles and hopes that people know today were around yet. They were still in the box. It was a frighteningly and positively dull time to be alive. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Here, We have Pandora in her dear uncle's study, staring down this ornate wooden box that she has been forbidden to touch. The box is sitting there. Pandora doesn't know what's in it. Maybe something good, maybe something bad. Might even be empty. And in her shoes, I cannot say I would do anything differently, because what is being a human if not being curious? Being explorers and detectives. We are a box-opening people. And Pandora was, and she opened the box, and what came out was very, very bad. The box was full of monsters, full of lies and hate and war and hunger and internet trolls. She didn't recognize those, but they were there. And hangnails and envy and arguments and that feeling where you know you should not eat one more cookie, but you really want to eat one more cookie, and you know you're going to get a bellyache, but you eat the cookie anyway, and then you get the bellyache. Bellyaches were in the box, aches of all kinds, headaches, diseases, fear. If you've ever done something that you knew was not okay, but thought would be kind of okay, and it turned out to be not at all okay, take that feeling and multiply it by 10,000, and that's the feeling Pandora had in the pit of her stomach after opening the box. She had never felt anything like that before because the feeling was one of the monsters that had come out of the box. It was bad, and there was no way around it. And as Pandora is sitting there in despair with no idea of what to do next, a little bird climbed up onto the lip of the box and said, "Hey." "Hey," said Pandora back. "Who are you?" "I'm Hope," said the bird. "Hope? Are you one of the monsters?" "Well, not really." "Well, will you help me put the monsters back?" "No." "Then what are you here for?" "Do I need to be here for something?" Pandora thought about this. She wasn't sure, but she said yes, because she wanted Hope to have a purpose. "Okay," said the bird. "In that case, I'm here for you." In the years that followed, life had its ups and downs. Some of the monsters that had come out of the box were really bad news. Others turned out to be mixed. Jealousy was a lot of fun at parties, and fear invented the roller coaster, which proved popular. Dealing with a world full of monsters wasn't always easy, but it was always interesting. The right thing to do wasn't always obvious. Pandora stayed curious and hopeful all through her days, but she made friends and lost friends. She had a family and many grand adventures, and at the end, looking back on a full, rich life, Pandora couldn't think of a single regret. The prayer that I'm going to read was written by Christian Schmidt. "Spirit of life and love, be with us in this time as people suffer, as parents grieve, as violence rages. Be with us who feel the pain of loss, who feel anger at injustice. Be with the oppressed and change the heart of the oppressor, for we know that both are joined in their humanity, no matter how often we forget it. Help us remember the hope we had, the hope we have, and the hope we will have. Help us remember joy in the midst of sadness, success in the midst of challenge, and good things in the midst of bad. Help us to be better people, to work for better things, and to create a better world. Amen."
Our reading today is from Lisa Wells' book, Believers, Making a Life at the End of the World. One of the ways we humans organize and make sense of our experience is through the telling of stories. And the stories we tell, in turn, have profound effects on how we relate to ourselves and to those entities in which our lives depend. Many of us are learning that the stories we inherited are not only suspect, but in a large part responsible for the threats we now face and will visit upon our heirs. The story of infinite growth, of survival of the fittest, the story of human supremacy, and incongruously, an innate human selfishness and propensity to destroy. Chiefly, the story that tells us that we are separate from the whole, at once alienated from broader community of life and above its laws and ecological reciprocity. News stories are in order, but often the dominant culture responds to the crises at hand by replicating old themes. Features about doomsday preppers, Silicon Valley tech bros with go bags and ATVs, million-dollar compounds and decommissioned missile silos in central Oklahoma, my particular version of hell. Stories about life support systems devised to keep self-interested individuals alive while the rest of us burn. Stories that are, of course, no deviation at all from the dominant narrative. Perhaps the fullest expression of this lack of imagination is the techno-utopian dream of colonizing other galaxies, as if colonization weren't at the root of our trouble, but its solution, the ultimate geographic cure. Even if some eccentric but benevolent billionaire invented a machine to spirit the human race to outer space, big if, it's delusional to think we wouldn't take our problems with us. It seems to me there is a surplus of terror and delusion in the ether, but spare a few visions of how you and I, relatively ordinary people, might live otherwise. I believe the future of the world depends on these visions. If our descendants are alive and well in 100 years, it will not be because we exported our unexamined lives to another planet. It will be because we were, in this era, able to articulate visions of life on Earth that did not result in their destruction.
Or take a sip of water. There is a comic strip from 2016 that has been circulating around the internet since that time. You may have seen it. It gets passed around a lot. Since its creation, times have been such that this comic strip has remained relatable pretty much constantly. It's actually eerie, the degree to which there have been 0 moments since 2016 to today that this comic has not felt exactly 100% relevant. The cartoon is in 2 panels. The first panel depicts a dog sitting at a kitchen table with a cup of coffee. The dog is wearing a cute brown bowler hat. They have a sort of a placid expression, no sense of alarm, no panic. This is noteworthy because the room that they're sitting in is on fire, with flames in front of them, behind them, around them, and a cloud of dark gray smoke collecting at the ceiling. And in the next panel, this is the same as the first one, the dog, the table, the coffee, and the fire. But in this one, the dog is saying, "This is fine." You remember 2016? The events of that year? A year that I had hoped would bring the first woman president. A continuation of what I had felt at the time like an unstoppable march toward progress and social justice and equality. Gay marriage was the law of the land. Trans justice was a discussion in a way that I had never experienced before. These things that I had thought of as impossible dreams were happening. And you probably remember also how the year ended, very differently from my high hopes. 2016 was the year that we learned about how much of the internet is made of Russian propagandists whose stated goal is to make Americans hate each other. 2016 was the year that a candidate for president who violated every rule of human decency was nonetheless elected to the highest office in the land. It was a year that empowered racists and bigots of all types, a year of rising white supremacy, rising violence, and rising conspiracy theories, a year that felt to me, and I imagine to many of us, like the world was on fire. That dog, sitting there with their coffee, was all of us. And they haven't gone away. I see the "This is fine" dog posted online all the time as a response to one current event or another. And since 2020, those events have come faster and more. The stories of overwhelmed hospitals getting closer to home, first in China, then Italy, then New York, then Seattle. The fear that I felt as phalanxes of National Guard helicopters flew over my house, bringing supplies northward. A friend in the UK, on one of my very first ever Zoom calls, interrupted by the noise of a convoy of supply trucks rolling past her house in the middle of the night. An emergency. that has continued, changing but never exactly ending. On that Zoom call in those very early days, my friend and I talked about the ticker tape parades that marked the end of World War II. And I wondered whether the end of the pandemic would look like that. Whether we, the people of the earth, might experience having come through such a trial together as a kind of shared global victory. She told me, rightly, that I was wishful thinking, and predicted, correctly, that there wouldn't ever be a moment of celebration to mark the end of the pandemic, that it would undoubtedly change and continue to impact our lives and eventually come to feel like normal, but it would never exactly end. And all along, this slowly changing collective trauma has come with what felt to me like an abject degradation of the social order. I was born in 1980, nearly a decade after the Roe versus Wade decision. When I learned about women fighting for and winning the constitutional right to bodily autonomy, it was in the same context that I learned about desegregation, universal suffrage, and emancipation. I learned about these things as historical facts. A world without a constitutional right to bodily autonomy, the right to end an unwanted pregnancy, was as unimaginable to me then as a world in which slavery is still legal. And yet, here we are. William Butler Yeats, his poem, The Second Coming, feels very real to me lately. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world, the blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. I don't want to stand here and call myself the best, but if I can make a confession, everything that we've been through since 2016 has left me lacking all conviction. It has me feeling very uncertain. It has me feeling numb. It has me feeling like that dog sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee while the house burns around them, saying, "This is fine." But that dog, if they are a Unitarian Universalist, big if, may be ignoring our fourth principle, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. The dog is sitting in the burning house, and I imagine them feeling utterly helpless to stop any of it, and in order to resolve the conflict this creates in their mind, the dog has abdicated responsibility for the truth and has decided to accept an easier but less true set of facts than those in front of them. This is fine. It is not fine. The house is burning. The dog is in mortal danger, and here they are sipping coffee and ignoring the reality that unfolds around them, and I get it. It's not like they have the answers. It's not like they can solve the problem of a burning house when their only available resources consist of a cup of coffee and a silly hat. The flames are all around them. There's no safe escape route. They don't know what to do. And lacking all conviction, all they have left is to say, this is fine. And that's really what this sermon is trying to be about. It's trying to be about how to continue in a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, while the events of the world, of which I have only mentioned a few, can leave a person feeling uncertain and lacking in conviction. Now, I don't think I'm alone in this feeling. These are uncertain times. There are lies, big and small, coming at us at what feels like a furious pace. The atmospheric carbon trend line is still in worst-case scenario territory. People with great power are standing on great big public soapboxes, loudly proclaiming absurdly apocalyptic lies that the election was stolen, the pandemic is a hoax, that birds aren't real. We know that these things are falsehoods. The lies are patently obvious, and still, the part of the mind that wants and expects the truth to matter gets fatigued. So an old friend of mine named Lisa Wells, she wrote this book, provoked a lot of the thoughts that I'm sharing this morning. And she shared an idea with me a long time ago about a wall of grief. She had this idea that in order to see the reality of the world, to see the true extent of the environmental and political problems and the intractability of industrial capitalism, colonialism, injustice, and oppression, which she saw as intrinsically linked to civilization as it has been practiced for the past several thousand years, a person first has to metabolize a wall of grief, to feel the pain of the world and experience it. And only then can you begin to see the extent of the problem. As long as our grief is held in abeyance, a sort of reality distortion field remains in effect. And this is fine takes over. So, a science sidebar. There's a theory about how our minds process information called cognitive load. It's a pretty intuitive idea, I think. Basically, there's only so much information a person's mind can handle at a given time. And the more things we need to think about and the more details we hold in our minds, the less certain the whole system gets. Another related idea is decision fatigue. Researchers find that a person can only make a certain number of rational, reason-based decisions each day. At a certain point, we start turning to shortcuts. The science word here is heuristic decisions. I'd usually call it going with the gut. Most of the research about these things is done on people who make very high-stakes decisions every day. Emergency room doctors, Wall Street stock traders. But it affects all of us. There's also some interesting research on the impact of increased cognitive load on people experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. In a trauma state, we have a heightened sense of risk, and this can make us hyper-aware of our surroundings and increase cognitive load. It looks like this has an effect on our ability to process information about everyday things. These limits on decision-making and cognitive load impact all of us. We can only hold so many ideas in the mind. We can only make so many reasoned decisions before we slow down and take mental shortcuts, and the amount we can process is less when the room we're trying to drink our coffee in is on fire. It makes sense that we take shortcuts. It takes work to freely choose a responsible search for truth and meaning. Sometimes it takes more cognitive load than we have the ability to manage. And my understanding of the research around decision fatigue, again, not claiming to be an expert, just an enthusiastic amateur, is that once a person hits this state, the only thing that resets the system and allows reasoned, nuanced decision-making to return is sleep. Anyway, science over, back to big questions of philosophy and ethics. Even under ideal conditions, I don't think there's any guarantee that a free and responsible search for truth and meaning is a discrete thing with a knowable endpoint. For most of my life, I've believed in mystery and the unknown as a place to find the holy. I'm convinced that the only difference between science and magic is math. Magic is neat stuff we don't understand, and science is neat stuff that we can explain and quantify. I've long believed that the spark, the thing that makes humanity wonderful, is our ability to find meaning in mystery, to ride the unknown like a surfer rides a wave, and to treat a hunch like a holy quest, driving us to seek out new frontiers of knowledge. The curiosity is the thing, and the risk-taking, the opening of Pandora's box, because the quest for more knowing is worth the risk. Until recently, I would have told you that this unending voyage into infinite mystery is where I found my faith. Today, though, I find my faith shaken, and I am more skeptical of mystery than I've ever been in my entire life, because mystery and the unknown are also the place where lies and misinformation spread like a virus. The unknown, when it feels as scary as it has felt, feels as unsettled, is a place I want to run from. I want to say, this is fine, against the evidence of my own senses. In this state, we find ourselves vulnerable to trusting easy answers without the skeptical voice inside asking, is this really true? The internet is a minefield of ideas that promise to make sense of a senseless world. The airwaves are rich with charismatic leaders offering scapegoats and miracle cures. Fear and anger and sadness in a world that feels like it's on fire leaves us vulnerable. And so I'm not certain of my own mind or of what easy and comfortable lies I have unintentionally slipped into. In these unprecedented times, it's like each of us is both the lead researcher and the test subject in a massive and uncontrolled experiment with an infinite number of variables and no control group. The only way I know how to approach this sort of a situation is slowly, patiently, and with the expectation that there will be mistakes. And I have to say, I set out in this sermon to answer the question of how we can engage in a free and responsible search for truth and meaning when it feels like the world is on fire. And as answers go, this one feels unsatisfying to me. There is a tension that I don't know how to resolve between an ethic of we cannot wait for change. The problems we face are emergencies, and urgent solutions are needed. They demand our immediate attention. And on the other hand, my hunch that the thing we all need more than anything else in these times is patience, time, and rest. When I was growing up, my mom, who was a very wise woman, used to say, "The hurrier you go, the behinder you get." Now, on one particular day, I remember her saying this. We were rushing to leave the house on the verge of being embarrassingly late for something. There were groceries getting put away in the fridge. The dog is at the back door, scratching, needing to go out. The house is a rush of chaos, and I dropped an entire gallon of milk on the kitchen floor. The jug exploded. The milk went everywhere, and now we were definitely going to be late or not present at whatever it was we had been rushing for. And there's my mom, patiently reminding me of this key life lesson. The hurrier you go, the behinder you get. I think we've all had an experience like this, rushing so fast to accomplish something that we end up further behind, and that gut drop moment where the priority suddenly shifts from getting out the door to dealing with a tremendous mess. It was good advice that my mom gave me, but it also feels harder to follow as the stakes get higher. How can you be careful and slow when the world is on fire? How can you go on living a normal life? So, in an adventurous science fiction book I recently finished, Leviathan Falls, which is the final book in the 9-book Expanse series by James S. M. Corey, if you're curious, there's this unknown entity threatening all human existence. And at the same time, the people are fighting a war, as if this alien intelligence that's going to kill them all, it doesn't matter. And during a break in the action, there's one character who asks another one how they can go on in the face of all these very, very high stakes, this overwhelming risk, and the other character says, all I can do is keep acting like the universe is going to keep existing and planning for a future in it. Later in the same story, a different character is trying to make sense of his own humanity in light of the violence and cruelty of human society. The seeming inevitability that that violence and cruelty is going to continue into the future. And what he says is, for every atrocity, there's 1,000 small kindnesses that no one noticed. 100 people who spent their lives loving and caring for each other. A few moments of real grace. Truth and meaning, it turns out, can come from swashbuckling space operas. We can never be certain that what we're doing is the right thing. We can only keep trying and correcting our course as we go. We can act in faith that the universe will continue existing, and that even as we are capable of doing great harm, there is goodness at our heart. And the ongoing unfolding knowledge that things will never be the same, but things will nonetheless be. The dog can take a moment with a cup of coffee in a burning room, free from judgment, because fine or not, this is. It's also the question at the heart of Lisa's book. I have to say, I'm talking about this book a lot because really reading it was one of the most profound things that's happened recently to me, and the fact that Lisa's an old friend of mine was really cool. I read this book and I was like, wow, even if I didn't know you, this would be really profound. So she writes about connection with others, and she writes about the land as a source of hope, and I'm going to give you another selection from what she wrote. In my own life, I know I'd be dead if it were not for the interventions of other people. An interested teacher, the nurture of my friends, the nurture of the land and its many presences. writers I would never meet but whose words would guide me through. Often these interventions were small and basic and not always perfectly executed, but they added up and they held the world together long enough for me to become. I believe we have that to give one another and to the place we live. And what we have to give is also the weight that we carry. Returning to the earth and to one another will require more from us than a conceptual shift. It will require embodied practice. It will mean powering down the intermediaries that train us to regard ourselves and others as two-dimensional outputs of content and return to three-dimensional space, to imperfect exchange, to call and response, to lived relationships with plants and water and soil. This will sometimes mean being ugly, inconsistent, vulnerable, anxious, clumsy, messing it up. It will mean fighting and reconciling and reaching across the divide of mutual misapprehension to try again. This is the only way I know how to search for truth and meaning responsibly in any kind of times, and especially in hard times like these. Slowly, patiently, with kindness and compassion in our bodies, with the expectation of mistakes and disagreements, with love, accompanied by an irrational hope, whose only purpose is our comfort, with a nap, with a silly hat and a cup of coffee, and taking a moment to relax even though nothing is fine, even though the room is on fire. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Thank you. This is a really wonderful community, and I feel so lucky to get to be a part of it and to get to occasionally come here and talk to you all. So thanks for letting me do this. And I'll see you next week.